And here we are again with Frank after the dormant oil spraying. He's graciously going to show us how to prune a fig, and I presume it's the time of year to prune figs. So, Frank, thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Yes, I'd like to talk about the fig a little bit. Fig, of course, most people know is not really native to Vancouver Island. I think historically people would associate figs with the Middle East or southern Italy, that sort of thing. And that's indeed where they do grow, but they can do quite well here with a little caveat, and that is to really utilize your microclimates. They like warm. The warmer the better for a fig. So if you look here, where I have this tree is facing almost due south. South is that direction. And it's against the wall of the house. The wall of the house is fantastic for reflecting light, storing heat, and reflecting that heat back onto a plant. So the difference of a plant being 2 feet from the house and 20 feet is difference of night and day, probably like two agricultural zones. So this tree is right up against the house, ready to get all that light and energy, and fairly resistant to small events like we had last week with the snow. It'll handle that no problem. We haven't had any really cold weather here, but I think it'll handle the cold as long as it doesn't get down into, say, past -10 or something like that. I know in Toronto there are people, notably some Italian gardeners, who have a great love for the fig, and they grow it in Ontario. And the way they do it is that in the winter they actually bend the tree right over and cover the whole tree in leaves and grass and mulch, and leave it there for the winter, and then bring it back up in the spring, and they have their beautiful and beloved figs ready to go. Historically, we've had basically two types of figs sold in the valley. One's the brown turkey, and the other one is Desert King. So the brown turkey is a brown, purple, smaller fruit. The Sierra King is a large green one, which ripens in midsummer. My brown turkeys ripen in the fall. I get a crop starting in about September and going right through until November. In the native habitat of the fig, they produce two crops a year, one in the spring, one in the fall. Here, I've heard of the occasional person getting two crops, or just a few figs on one of the crops, and one of the crops being the major crop. So for the most, it's just one crop here. So I'm going to show some pruning. This fig's been in the ground, I think, about 4 years, and it started producing well last year, so I expect it to be producing more. The problem here is, of course, it's right next to a path. So I want to take off things which are going to interfere with my passage and other people's passage. And also I want to keep the entire plant lower. I don't like to go up on ladders. I want to be able to pull a fig down and pick it by hand while I'm on the ground. So we'll look at a little bit of pruning now. Okay, we're about to start pruning this fig tree. I just want to point out to you how our goal here is somewhat different than it compared to, say, pruning an apple tree or one of the stone fruit trees, where the goal is try to open up the middle so you've got lots of air going in there. On the fig tree, our goal is, it's not about air and circulation, it's about heat. This is a heat lover, so you want to make sure that you're conserving that heat. So we don't want to open up the center to have a big open area like you would in an apple tree. Other than that, we're using basically standard pruning rules. So any branches, the 3Ds, dead, dying, or diseased, they automatically get removed. Now this is a young tree that I've been keeping up on, so there's not too much of that here. But then we go into things like crossing branches. So here's an example. We've got two branches crossing. if you come up here for a close-up, Linda, you can see where they've crossed. They've actually started to wear down one branch. So that'll happen when branches cross. So you don't want crossing branches. Take that one right out at the stub. And you don't want branches that are growing into the tree. So take that out there. And we have a little branch here that's going to grow into the tree. We don't want that. Now also what I don't want here, because it's a fig tree and I've got to harvest the fruit, is I don't want a big high tree. So I'm going to reduce some of these higher branches. And look where I'm cutting it. Come here again, Linda. I'm going to cut this just up from the bud, but the bud's going in the direction I want. So it's going to grow out this way. If I cut it here, bud would go in there and it would grow in towards the wall and in towards the tree. I don't want that, so I'm going to cut this just above a well-located branch that's growing in the direction I want. Okay, take out some of this really weak stuff. That. Again, we've got a branch here growing right into the tree. Don't want that. And some of these that are growing into the path, we're just going to shorten these up a little bit. Again, I take it to a bud where I like the direction of it's going. I've got a weak one here and another one that's growing into the tree. Okay, moving right along. Okay, I've got some stuff here which is probably going right on the wall, which is okay, but I want to keep the height down. So just take a little bit off. So this is looking better already. Again, this branch heading right into the center of the tree. Take it off. This one's getting a little high. And you can see the remains of old figs from last fall. These ones were too late in developing and never developed into a fruit. Okay. Here we go again, another crossing branch that's hitting another one, growing right into the center of the tree. Remove that. One's growing a little far out. Shorten it out a little bit. And again, you've got a height issue here. So I'm going to take this one down. Again, you see I want the branch to go that direction. So I cut it onto a bud that's pointing in the right direction. So just above that bud, and here we go. Again, we're getting into a height issue here. Though I will say, when harvesting the figs, you can bend these branches. They're not too brittle, so you can bring them to grab a branch and bring them down to get those high figs, and avoid climbing ladders, which I don't like to do anymore. You wouldn't know my dad was a fireman, but. Crossing branch. And this one's right against, leaning against the wall of the house. Cut that back a bit. And I like to, after doing a little bit of pruning, step back and have a look at the tree. Things will pop up to you that you've missed the first time around often. So it's good just to step back and take a little break. So I see that big tall one that's got to go. So you notice when I prune these, I often leave a little stub. The reason for that is invariably there's going to be a bit of dieback. So you don't want it dying too far back into the junction here where the other branches that I want to keep are. So I leave that little stub, and I can come back later in the summer and cut that clean off. But for now I'm going to leave that because it'll probably die back a little bit on its own. Do you guys have any questions of what I'm doing and why? Please feel free.
Now, how fast will this grow now that you've pruned it? They put on a fair bit of growth in the summer,
Yes,
don't they?
yes. This is at a stage where it's literally exploding.
Yeah.
So, you know, you won't even notice this. I'll come back next fall and have to do this same thing over or even more.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, growing very quickly. I mean, they start off like all trees the first year or two when you first establish them. They're very slow growing, but once they take off and if they like a spot, they let you know. So this guy has let me know. He's really exploded with growth and started producing good fruit and likes this nice warm spot against the wall.
Now we have a brown turkey fig that's in a pot, and we bring it into our greenhouse every winter.
Okay.
And we've had it now 3 or 4 years, and it's just now beginning to produce maybe 10 or 12 figs every year, which is a good number. I mean, you know, figs are quite sweet, but we do like our figs. But you know, we're thinking, oh, maybe we should plant it in the ground, but then our ground is quite wet, so I'm not sure that would be very viable.
I mean, this is very dry. It's right against the house, and I virtually never fertilize it. I give it a little bit of lime I put in there just because our soils are so acid. But I don't think I've ever intentionally given it a round of fertilizer. But it's fairly decent garden soil there. And you know, the first year it was slow growing, but it seems to have really taken off since then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what about pests now? Are they susceptible to something that's...
The only problem I've had is one year the starlings found out they liked figs. And so my other tree they really went after. That's the only pest that I've noticed. And that's maybe the good thing of having a tree that's not really native to this locality. It doesn't have all the pests that they may have in Asia, Southern Europe. I don't know. But yeah, no pests whatsoever. The leaves are always healthy. There's no light or rusts on them. Yeah, so
the perfect tree then.
Well, within reason, within the parameters of having a good microclimate, a warm spot.
Right.
Maybe I'll show you a little story on my other fig. Okay, if you just want to. Okay, I'd just like to talk a little bit about what a huge difference a microclimate and the change can make. This is a brown turkey fig that I have growing right next to the house, and it's partly under a cover, an eave, and so it's getting all the heat that the sun, late afternoon sun gives, and it loves it. It produces very well. But it wasn't always that way. When I got this tree, originally I planted where this pine is, which is still in front of the house, but it's about 4 meters maybe from the house itself. It stayed there, the fig stayed there for about 5 years and didn't produce one fruit. It sulked. When I decided to make a little rock garden, crevice garden here, I had to move the fig. So I dug it up and moved it closer to the house. That same year, the fig started producing fruit. It was telling me, oh, this is much better. I like this. I'm warm for the first time in 5 years. So the small changes in your microclimate that you can have around your house, use it to when it comes to growing figs. They like the heat, so make sure it's on the south or southwest side exposure. Closer to the house the better, or closer to another building because they reflect heat. So that's very important when growing figs. If you have questions about figs, I'd like to recommend an expert that we have living on Denman Island. He spoke to the club, I think maybe 5 years ago. And his website is Figs for Life, www.figs for life. And his name is Devmurti Khalsa. And he has a nursery on Denman where I believe he grows over 60 different varieties of figs. He knows more about figs, or forgotten more about figs than I'll ever know. And a real expert, so if you have any tough questions, this is the man to see and to address your questions to. Do you have that? Great.
Frank, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for showing us your dormant oil spraying and the pruning of the figs. It's something I think that a lot of us have in our yards that we need to do and that we probably should do for our figs. And thank you very much for
It's a pleasure.
And there we go. COVID friendly. Thank you.